He asked me to stop being difficult while signing a $20 million handshake deal with a company I couldn't even find on the state registry. That's when I knew something was off. Vincent Kerr, our brand new CEO with movie star teeth and a LinkedIn addiction, was pitching a game-changing partnership in a room full of suits too scared or too smitten to ask follow-ups. Phoenix Labs, he called it. A strategic innovation incubator supposedly valued at $300 million. Except the last time I checked, the tech world doesn't hand out unicorn status to Delaware shells with no verified employees and a website built like it was coded by a teenager on NyQuil. I sat there in that glass coffin of a boardroom, pen hovering over a risk approval form, staring down a man who thought regulations were a vibe check. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. I just asked for one thing: confirmation that our directors and officers' insurance would cover this partnership if it went sideways. Vincent actually laughed. Out loud. Like I'd just asked him to spell fiduciary. "We'll sort it out later," he said, waving his hand like I was a fly buzzing too close to his espresso. "Don't be such a bureaucrat, Elliot. Be a team player." Hey, before we go further, if you're listening to this and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Seriously, it takes 1 second and it helps our team keep digging up the stories corporate HR wishes you'd forget. And if you hit like, you're officially part of the audit trail. All right, back to Vincent. You'd think after 20 years in corporate risk and compliance, I'd be numb to moments like that. But I've only ever learned one truth. The moment someone tells you to stop documenting is the moment you document harder. So I clicked my pen closed and slid the form back across the table. "I'll need written confirmation from legal that D&O covers this deal," I said. Not loud, just clear. Vincent blinked at me like I'd farted in church. Then he turned to the CFO, snapped his fingers, and said, "We'll move forward anyway. Get someone with a bigger signature." That someone wasn't me, and that form never got my sign-off. I walked back to my office, pulled up the D&O policy, and opened a new email with the subject line: Request for D&O verification, Phoenix Labs. I CC'd our general counsel and 2 legal analysts, attached a PDF of Clause 7C. Then I opened my internal risk log and wrote one line: CEO proceeding without risk officer approval, documenting refusal pending insurance coverage confirmation. By noon, Vincent had announced the Phoenix partnership on our internal dashboard with the kind of graphic design that screamed "Made in Canva by a caffeinated intern." By the end of the day, the stock ticked up 2%. The board clapped. Marketing launched a blog post. Only legal hadn't replied to my email. That wasn't unusual. They were already stretched thin from the acquisition mess and had learned to avoid anything that smelled like Vincent's ego. But I saved a copy anyway, just like I always did. People think the job of a risk officer is to say no. It's not. It's to keep receipts for when everyone forgets they were told yes without a net. I'd been through 3 CEOs at Portanex, watched one cry in a deposition and another exit with a yacht and a shattered pension plan. I don't get rattled anymore. But there was something in the way Vincent operated, like the rules were a formality he tolerated out of boredom. He didn't build guardrails. He walked past them. And now he'd invited a firm with more red flags than a bullfighting arena into our financials, just because he owed someone from college a favor. I kept quiet. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just policy, protocol, and precision. But that signature, that missing signature, it would be the most expensive no I'd ever given. The first time I saw Vincent Kerr, he was grinning under a spotlight in our newly redesigned lobby, shaking hands like a senator on election week. PR had gone full Broadway. Backlit logo wall, espresso bar, and intro video with drone shots of warehouses we didn't even own. The board called him a disruptor, said he was going to inject vision, urgency, momentum. I saw a man wearing $900 sneakers and the kind of charm that makes auditors reach for their inhalers. 3 days into his reign, he summoned me to have a chat, which, in Vincent speak, meant he wanted a rubber stamp from someone he considered furniture. I walked into the conference room, and there it was, his grand entrance. "Elliot," he said, all teeth and tan, "I've got something exciting, game-changer stuff. Just need you to take a look and give it your usual thumbs up." The file folder on the table was unbranded, the spreadsheet barely populated. I flipped through it while he talked a mile a minute. Phoenix Labs. The name sounded like a failed crypto app, but he said it like he was unveiling the next SpaceX. It's a joint venture, high growth AI play, privately held. My college roommate's firm, we've talked synergies for years. We'll inject 20 million, get equity, advisory rights, the works. It's lean, it's fast, and it gets us into verticals we're too bloated to touch. I looked up. AI verticals? He waved a hand. Machine learning, behavior modeling, health tech integrations, whatever buzzwords we need to get the board hard. The point is, it's off-book, low friction. We wire the money, they build the stack, and we ride the rocket. I kept my face still. It's a habit you develop when you've seen PowerPoints torpedo careers. Do we have risk alignment documentation? Vincent blinked. What? Third-party vetting, KYC compliance, audit rights, reps and warranties, D&O coverage confirmation. That made him smile, condescending, like I'd just asked if we still used fax machines. Jesus, Elliot. This isn't a murder trial. It's a partnership between friends. I ignored the flare in my gut. If it's a partnership and if it's involving company funds, we need D&O liability assurance, especially given the nature of the relationship. You think I'm doing something shady? I didn't blink. I think the policy requires explicit approval from risk for any off-balance sheet transaction, which means I need coverage confirmation in writing before I sign anything. Vincent let out a theatrical sigh, leaned back in his chair, and looked at the ceiling like he was praying for patience. You're really going to hold this up over paperwork? I'm not holding anything up, I said. I'm doing my job. That was the end of the meeting. He snatched the folder back, muttered something about old guard paranoia, and said legal would get me whatever bedtime story I needed. I left the room already drafting the email in my head. Subject line: request for D&O verification, Phoenix Labs. Recipients: legal counsel, deputy GC, policy compliance. Attachments: policy clause 7C, internal guidelines doc, my notes from the meeting. Body: transaction flagged for potential policy exclusion due to lack of formal risk approval. CEO indicated urgency, requesting written confirmation of D&O applicability. No response that day, or the next. Meanwhile, Vincent paraded the deal in front of the finance team like it was his firstborn. He name-dropped Phoenix in 3 internal memos, looped marketing into a fake logo refresh, and pitched it to the strategy subcommittee as our ticket to Q4 dominance. He skipped every procedural hurdle with the enthusiasm of a man who thought liability was a myth invented by consultants. I kept logging everything. Risk memo entry: CEO initiated non-standard deal without risk confirmation. D&O exposure unclear, awaiting legal response. On paper, it looked like I was dragging my feet. In truth, I was putting up the only guardrail between Portinex and the black hole Vincent was calling a partnership. I didn't yell, I didn't escalate, I just made sure my name wasn't on anything binding. And that email, the one with the subject line about D&O, it would go unanswered, but never unseen. The third time Vincent brought up Phoenix in a leadership meeting, it wasn't a proposal anymore. It was a fait accompli dressed in keynote slides and stock photo optimism. He paced in front of the boardroom screen like he was delivering a TED Talk, not outlining a $20 million off ledger gamble. The phrase disruptive vertical integration came up so often I started writing tallies in the margin of my notebook just to stay awake. I wasn't the only one holding my breath. A few department heads exchanged glances across the table, but no one spoke. Vincent had that way of infecting the air with either charisma or fear, depending on your pay grade. Halfway through his pitch, he clicked to a slide that showed our projected ROI, based on numbers I'd never signed off on. I squinted at the chart. Compound growth curves, retention metrics, something labeled proprietary sentiment analysis. All fiction, all frictionless, all forward-looking, unaudited junk. He caught my eye and smiled like we were co-conspirators. So we're moving forward with the initial transfer Friday, he announced, full of swagger. I've looped in finance and legal, and we're green on the wire. Just need risk to do its thing. Elliot? Every head turned. The room got quiet. I adjusted my pen calmly. I still haven't received confirmation from legal that this qualifies for D&O coverage. Until that's in writing, I won't authorize. Vincent chuckled, loud enough that the assistant VP of operations flinched. We'll sort it out later. I need you to be a team player. I am being a team player, I replied. My job is to protect this company when the excitement wears off and the subpoenas arrive. That landed like a lead pipe on marble. A few people blinked. Vincent's smile didn't move, but his eyes went flat. We don't need a philosopher, Elliot. We need a signature. I folded my hands. Then you'll have to find it elsewhere. He stood there silent, long enough for the tension to turn physical. Then he turned to Rachel in compliance. Bright, sharp, 2 years into the job and not yet jaded. Rachel can process it. She hesitated. I can't sign risk approvals. You can process the paperwork, he snapped. We'll treat it as an operational expenditure for now. It was an end run. Not illegal, not yet, but dangerously close to the line. I didn't argue. That's how they trap you, make you look combative, obstructionist, petty. I simply picked up my binder, nodded once to the room, and left. The silence behind me said more than I ever could. Back in my office, I pulled up the audit log and began a new entry. Title: Furnix Transaction. Approval withheld pending risk confirmation. Date stamped. Indexed. Linked to prior D&O request. I attached my internal notes, Vincent's phrasing, the boardroom exchange, the fact that risk approval had been bypassed under a different cost center classification. I kept it clean. No adjectives, just facts. By 5 o'clock, the memo was stored on the internal risk drive and silently copied to a backup I kept off-site. Not paranoia, just insurance, for the moments when memory becomes a courtroom exhibit. I didn't hear from Vincent that evening, but Rachel sent a short email. Please confirm you've seen the amended authorization. I replied simply, I have not approved it. Then I printed it all. Not because I didn't trust the servers, because I didn't trust who owned them. The next day, the first $5 million transferred to Furnix. No coverage, no risk sign-off, no trail that pointed to anyone but the man who waved it through. Except there was a trail, and it started with a memo no one bothered to read. Yet. By Q2, Furnix was being hailed internally as Vincent's crown jewel, our tech-forward growth rocket, as he called it on the last earnings call, right before describing our legacy logistics systems as vintage. He spun stories of explosive user adoption, healthcare breakthroughs, and unrealized synergy value with a confidence I'd seen before. In the mirror, when someone's trying to hide a bruise with foundation. I sat in the back of that call room, headset muted, pen motionless, eyes fixed on a slide showing a 147% uptick in engagement for a product I'd never seen prototyped, let alone deployed. It was all flash, glowing graphs, buzzwords about predictive diagnostics, AI-enhanced user mapping, digital twins. The problem was simple. None of it aligned with the back-end numbers. In finance, the real ledgers whispered another story. Billing latency, partner churn, a lack of real integration touchpoints. Our shared accounts showed minimal API activity, no cross-system syncs, and a user base smaller than a mid-sized law firm's client portal. But Vincent wasn't just selling it to investors, he was believing it. And worse, people were letting him. The first red flag hit me mid-May. I was combing through Q1 risk indicators when I noticed the divergence, minor at first, a line item for Furnix engagement revenue in the public financials that didn't match our internal accruals. I flagged it, logged it, forwarded it to legal with a note. Unreconciled figures between internal audit and earnings statement. Please confirm source of revenue data for Furnix JV. No response. 2 days later, I found another. Internal monthly access logs for the Furnix platform showed under 300 unique entries, yet the investor deck touted over 30,000 active medical users. I triple-checked server timestamps, had DevOps pull the cross-region traffic reports, still no match. I didn't shout. I annotated. I opened a fresh risk discrepancy file titled Furnix, External versus Internal Metrics. First tab, Vincent's investor call quotes transcribed verbatim. Second tab, raw access logs. Third, annotated email trail. My questions, legal silence. I CC'd compliance again. I even tried looping in Rachel, hoping for a whisper of concern. Her out-of-office reply hit harder than it should have. Traveling with executive team for strategy offsite. Back next week. Strategy offsite. That's what they were calling it now. The board meetings became tighter, shorter, no more full deck presentations, just Vincent, the CFO, and the head of marketing, armed with glossy narratives and curated slide decks that made skepticism feel like sedition. I stopped getting invited to the pre-meeting reviews. When I asked, the EA just blinked at me and said, "Oh, they said they'd loop you in if there was anything compliance related." anything compliance related. I checked the logs again. By June, the disconnect had grown from thousands to millions. Furnix claimed downstream revenue from a health analytics suite that, according to our integration dashboard, wasn't even in sandbox testing. I added another tab to the file, titled it Risk Alert, Fabrication Risk Exposure, sent it up the chain. Again, nothing. Not even a read receipt. It was starting to feel deliberate, like someone had flipped a switch in legal and told them to play dead. They weren't just avoiding answers, they were protecting silence. So I kept building the report. Page by page, quote by quote, access log by access log. I didn't accuse, I documented, I didn't escalate, I stored. By the time summer rolled around, my desk had 3 separate folders labeled Furnix variances, 1 hard copy backup, and a USB drive in my desk drawer labeled only with the word mismatch, just in case. The trick wasn't to shout louder, it was to wait for the storm, because numbers don't lie. And silence? Silence doesn't hold up under subpoena. It started with a headline. Furnix CFO charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. By the time I finished reading the article, twice, the news ticker had already picked it up. Our share price dropped 9% in the first hour. The second headline hit harder. Portinex tied to fraud-ridden tech venture, regulatory investigation underway. I watched it unfold from my office, blinds half drawn, as employees filed past my glass wall, whispering and pretending they weren't staring. On the surface, everything still looked corporate clean, dashboards glowing, Slack channels buzzing, managers holding emergency syncs with forced optimism. But underneath, the wires were sparking. By noon, the first call came from legal, voice tight, flat. Elliot, the board wants you in the conference suite, now. I brought a flash drive, a notepad, and 2 manila folders. No dramatics, just documentation. When I walked in, Vincent was already there. Red-eyed, collar open, pacing like a man who'd suddenly discovered gravity. 3 board members sat at the end of the table, flanked by external counsel. 1 chair sat empty, presumably reserved for whichever sacrificial VP they decided to eject next. The air was tense, like everyone was holding their breath for someone else to start lying first. Mr. Nash, said one of the outside attorneys, gesturing toward the chair across from Kerr, we understand you had reservations regarding the Furnix partnership. Is that accurate? I met Vincent's eyes for the first time. He didn't blink, but he wasn't smirking either. I opened the first folder, laid out a printed email with the subject line in bold, Request for D&O verification, Furnix Labs. Dated January 14th, I said, sliding it across the table. Requesting written confirmation of coverage. Never answered. Then the second sheet, my risk memo, titled Furnix Transaction. Approval withheld pending risk confirmation. Dated January 17th. Formal refusal to approve the transaction due to unverified D&O protection. The lawyer leaned forward. You're saying you never approved the transaction. I tapped the lower corner of the memo. Not only did I not approve it, I documented that fact across 4 internal systems, 2 internal drives, and a private off-site copy. Vincent finally spoke. You never escalated this. I looked at him, calm, steady. Vincent, I sent 3 emails, filed 2 memos, and posted a variance report every quarter. Legal stopped replying. He opened his mouth, then shut it, like he knew anything else he said would be traceable. Useless. That's when the second attorney entered with a file. The mood in the room changed. She handed the packet to legal counsel and spoke 1 line. Investigators will arrive within the hour. They've requested to speak with the risk officer first. No one looked at me. Not yet. Vincent turned to legal, voice cracking. We need to activate our D&O policy. Now. The GC paled. There's a problem with that. Vincent's face twitched. What problem? She pulled out a letter, 2 pages, stamped, printed on the insurer's letterhead. I didn't need to read it. I'd already seen a version of it 2 weeks ago, back when I'd quietly sent a disclosure packet to our broker, just to check if the exposure was on their radar. The GC read aloud, hands shaking. Under Section 7C, policy coverage is excluded for transactions not explicitly approved by the Director of Risk and Compliance. In this instance, Mr. Elliot Nash declined to approve the Furnix transaction. As such, Portinex's D&O coverage does not extend to this matter. Silence. Long, still, heavy. Vincent sat back in his chair, eyes locked on the middle of the table like he'd forgotten how to see. I watched him read the letter again, line by line. His hand gripped the edge of the table like it might float away. "I was told we were covered," he muttered, to no one in particular. "I was told—" "No one signed off," I said. Voice even. "Not risk, not coverage." The second folder remained unopened in front of me. It held the full trail, every flagged number, every discrepancy, every unanswered message. "Would you be willing to cooperate with federal investigators, Mr. Nash?" the lead attorney asked. I didn't nod. I just opened the folder. "And Vincent?" He finally looked at me, but this time it wasn't with condescension. It was the stare of a man realizing the one signature he'd waved off might be the same one that could have saved him. I've seen panic before, but never in a bespoke suit with a 400 haircut trying to dial the insurer while his world caught fire. Vincent sat hunched at the far end of the long boardroom table, phone to his ear, the D&O policy packet spread in front of him like a crime scene he didn't recognize. 3 calls deep, and he still hadn't gotten past the front line. The insurer's rep just kept repeating the same thing, voice calm and clipped. "We've reviewed the policy. Clause 7C is clear." By the time they escalated him to someone who mattered, someone with a title and a legal team, the hands holding the phone were visibly trembling. His voice cracked on the first question. "You're telling me I'm not covered?" A pause. Then a reply I'll never forget. "Mr. Kerr, your risk officer explicitly declined to approve this transaction. There's no ambiguity." It was rare to hear silence that loud in a room designed for pitch decks and applause. Legal sat on one side of the table, stone-faced and sweating, flipping through a printed copy of the policy as if some magical footnote might appear. The GC, Meredith, kept her pen resting against her lips like she was hoping if she stayed quiet long enough, the letter would rewrite itself. It didn't. Vincent finally spoke again, almost pleading. But it was greenlit. It went through finance, legal process, the forms, the board was briefed. The insurer didn't care. That's the thing people like Vincent never understand. When the house is on fire, insurance doesn't ask who meant well. It asks who followed the damn blueprint. Clause 7C. Approval must be in writing by Officer of Risk and Compliance to ensure coverage under this policy. That was it. One sentence, short, cold, carved into the margins of every deal I'd reviewed for 13 years. We had it there for a reason, because someday someone would try to move fast, break things, and expect the cleanup to come with a ribbon. And now here he was, reading that sentence over and over like he could bend it with disbelief. Meredith leaned forward, low and slow. "We might be able to argue procedural ambiguity if we can show that risk was made aware." "I was made aware," I cut in. "I refused. In writing, on file, dated and archived." She looked at me, eyes narrowing, not hostile, just searching for softness. She didn't find any. "You're saying there's no gray area?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just reached into my bag, pulled out the laminated policy sheet I kept for board reviews, and slid it forward. Highlighted in yellow was Clause 7C, and next to it a small handwritten note. "Elliot, always sign last." Vincent pushed back from the table, chair scraping hard against the floor. His jaw worked like he was chewing on a confession he'd never practiced. The call ended with a sterile goodbye from the insurer and a promise. They would issue a formal position letter within the hour. Until then, all coverage was considered suspended for matters related to the Phoenix transaction. No D&O shield, no indemnity, no lifeline. For the first time since his arrival, Vincent didn't have a one-liner. He just sat there, blinking, as if someone had unplugged the charisma. He looked at me, really looked, the way a man does when he realizes the poker game he thought he was winning wasn't poker at all, but chess, and I was the piece he didn't bother learning the rules for. "Why didn't you push harder?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell me it was this serious?" I gave the smallest shrug. "You told me to stop being a bureaucrat." That was the last thing I said that day. I left the room quietly. No dramatics, no smirk, just me and my binder. Inside it, emails, flags, timestamps, memos, all the things he called noise when the music was still playing. And now there was no music, just Clause 7C, and a man holding a letter that said exactly what he never wanted to hear. Coverage denied. The emergency session was called at 6 Hunuk a.m., which in corporate speak is as close to "the sky is falling" as you get without sirens. The executive floor was still dark when I walked in. A security guard I'd never seen before nodded at me like I was carrying a detonator. Maybe I was. In the boardroom, the temperature felt 3 degrees colder. Kerr was already seated, jaw locked, hands clasped like he was auditioning for remorse. No blazer today, no watch, just a man stripped down to shirt sleeves and desperation. The board filed in slowly. No jokes, no coffees, no polite shoulder squeezes. They took their seats like jurors. Everyone knew the headline, everyone had seen the denial letter. But now they wanted a story, not Vincent's version, the actual one. The chair, Harlan Roth, started things off with a voice low enough to make everyone lean in. Mr. Kerr, as of this morning, we are officially under review. Federal investigators have requested preliminary cooperation. Before we determine how to proceed internally, we need a clear timeline of events surrounding the Furnix transaction. Vincent straightened. His voice came fast. Too fast. First, let me just say this was never intended to circumvent protocol. The speed of the opportunity created urgency. I believed, in good faith, that Elliot was informed, and I was informed, I said, cutting him off gently, when you asked me to sign a $20 million transfer without confirming D&O coverage. He shot me a glare. I didn't return it. Harlan held up a hand. Mr. Nash, would you be willing to share what documentation you have? I placed a slim folder on the table, opened it. No drama, just page 1. January 14th, request for D&O verification, Furnix Labs. January 17th, Furnix transaction, approval withheld pending risk confirmation. February 3rd, discrepancy notice, Furnix metrics versus internal logs. March 8th, risk memo number 22, unreconciled financial data. April 19th, escalation email, variance exposure. May 7th, no reply follow-up. June 2nd, final risk memo, refusal to validate JV metrics. I paused after each one, let the silence do the talking. Every email was copied to legal, I added, all confirmed as delivered, some opened, none answered. The room sat in stillness. Vincent tried again, voice tight. I don't think the severity of Elliot's concerns were ever clearly escalated to the board. If we had known... Vincent, Harlan said, flat and final, your signature was on every quarterly risk report. You had full access to the discrepancy memos. You spoke about Furnix in 3 earnings calls with metrics we now know were unverified. No one interrupted him. No one needed to. Then Harlan turned to me. Mr. Nash, if formal cooperation is requested by federal investigators, will you comply? I looked up. Yes. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Across the table, the head of legal slowly closed her binder as if she finally understood how thin the ice had been this entire time. Next to her, the CFO leaned back slightly, just enough to put space between himself and Kerr. One by one, the rest followed. I've seen 1,000 micro-movements in boardrooms over the years, small shifts that mean everything. Today, they all leaned away from Vincent, subtly, instinctively, like gravity had shifted and he was no longer the sun in the system, but a black hole swallowing his own orbit. He didn't speak again. No one came to his defense. By the end of the session, the board voted to place him on immediate leave pending investigation. His voice cracked when he asked if he'd still retain access to his executive email. No, Harlan said. Not anymore. I left with my folder. No one stopped me. No one thanked me either. But as the door shut behind me, I caught a glimpse of Vincent in the glass reflection, hands limp, eyes hollow, and every chair around him just slightly pushed back. The headline was surgical. Portinex suspends CEO after JV collapse, citees rogue executive lapse. No mention of Kerr's name until the 3rd paragraph. No mention of me at all. That's how these stories go. The villain gets demoted to a footnote, the cleanup crew stays invisible, and PR repaints the blast crater like a fresh development site. Within 48 hours, the company severed all ties to Furnix. The transfer accounts were frozen. Every trace of the partnership, logos, strategy decks, pitch videos, vanished from the intranet like a purged infection. I didn't delete anything, of course. I archived it, quietly, permanently. When legal reached out again, it wasn't to apologize, it was to offer stability incentives. A retention bonus, a title bump, an advisory role to help reshape compliance infrastructure moving forward. I read the email once, then turned off my monitor. Promotion? No thanks. What I wanted had nothing to do with pay. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with Harlan Roth and Meredith from legal. No boardroom theatrics this time, just a quiet conference room and 3 chairs that didn't squeak. I'll stay through the transition, I told them. You'll get my cooperation. No games, no press leaks. Harlan nodded, cautious. We appreciate that, Elliot. But I have one condition, I added, sliding a thin folder across the table. Inside was a printed version of our D&O policy, highlighted, annotated, and bearing a sticky note tab on the page that mattered most. Clause 7C, the one they all knew now. I want the clause reinstated, I said. Expanded, not just for executive-level deals or high-cap transactions. All discretionary partnerships, no matter size, speed, or source of origin, must carry written risk. Officer approval before funds move. Meredith hesitated. We'd need to run that through the new oversight committee. You can take it to a committee, you can send it through legal, you can carve it into marble for all I care, but you're not rebuilding this place on handshakes and LinkedIn bios again. Not on my watch. They exchanged a glance, not pushback, just realism. We'll make it happen, Harlan said finally. I nodded once, nothing more. 2 days later, the memo reappeared on the internal policy board. Policy Memo 7C, reactivated. Same formatting, same clause, but with one small change on the footer. Effective immediately, applies to all discretionary financial transactions. Approval must be written and archived. Non-compliance voids coverage. They didn't credit me, didn't need to. That footer, that was my name. In HR, they framed it as a legacy reset. A necessary recalibration of our risk culture. New compliance workshops were scheduled. Finance was forced to undergo clause-by-clause refresher training. Even procurement started whispering 7C like it was a spell that kept demons at bay. I didn't attend the workshops, didn't sit on the panel, didn't speak on the town hall live stream about lessons learned. Instead, I went back to my office, powered down the hard drive labeled Phoenix, and locked it in the cabinet behind me. No gloating, no speeches, just quiet reform. Cold, precise, permanent. The room had no windows, just beige walls, an old fan rattling in the ceiling vent, and a water pitcher no one touched. The federal deposition suite at Delmar and Gray was designed to make people sweat, slowly. On one side of the table sat the agency reps, polite, blank-faced, flanked by outside counsel. On the other, Vincent Kerr, under oath. His tie was gone, his cufflinks too, just a limp collar and skin gone 2 shades paler than I'd ever seen it. Between us, a projector screen, dimmed to low brightness, displaying a scanned letter in 12-point Times New Roman. 2 pages, dated, certified, signed by the insurer's general counsel. 1 paragraph at a time, they walked him through it. Clause 7C. Approval must be in writing by Officer of Risk and Compliance. Mr. Nash declined to authorize the Phoenix transaction. Therefore, coverage for this matter is denied. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Each sentence landed like a gavel. Kerr sat frozen, eyes darting from word to word like maybe he'd missed a typo that would save him. But the words were solid, immutable, final. He read it 3 times. The first time, with disbelief. The second, with dread. The third, acceptance. Across the table, I said nothing. My folder rested unopened in front of me. I hadn't needed it in hours. Everything they were showing him was already in my notes. I'd written half the letter's source material myself. One of the investigators finally leaned forward. Mr. Kerr, can you identify any documentation, email, memo, internal form, where Mr. Nash gave you written approval for the Phoenix transaction? He didn't answer. Mr. Kerr? Still nothing. He looked at the screen again, as if maybe this time the wording would shift, bend, offer him a version of reality where risk meant nothing and the past was optional. Then he turned to me, and for one long, full second, we just stared at each other. No hate, no apology, just that quiet understanding that passes between 2 people when one of them finally realizes they were never playing the same game. He didn't speak, and I didn't break the silence. Eventually, legal called the session closed. The agents gathered their binders. One of them thanked me, and I nodded. Vincent stayed seated, didn't even reach for the pitcher. I walked out. Into the hallway, into clean air. My phone buzzed once. A message from Meredith in legal. The feds want your notes. We told them you'd be ready. I didn't reply. Just tapped the screen off, slid the phone into my jacket, and kept walking. Quiet shoes, Straight spine, one man down, one policy clause reactivated, and silence finally on my side.